This episode is brought to you by Haiku and James, this week's newest patrons. Did Starlink just stop working for sailboats? Starlink just dropped a bombshell. They changed the package that most people use from RV Starlink to something they call Roam, and the proper marine version is still hugely expensive. With the plan change, pricing changes, and terms of service agreement modified a little bit. And what about this T-Mobile thing? We're going to dig in and we're going to find out this week on Everything You Need to Know. Did Starlink just stop working for sailboats? It's no secret how I feel about Starlink. I have a Starlink on my boat and I have one on my house. When I went down south on Lady K in 2018-2019, it was in the before times. I did what you did back then. You land in a foreign country and you beeline it to the cell phone store to buy a SIM card. And I had big needs too. I was uploading a YouTube video every week, so the internet was a big part of my life. But Starlink came along and totally shook up the internet on a boat problem, as much as solar panels changed the electricity on a boat problem. It's that big a deal. In the before times, we had the Iridium Go or some other such thing that gave us satellite communication for voice and text, and that was fine. When we were offshore, we could communicate, and that's a safety thing. We could also get weather off the SSB, but when we got to a place, we would jump on the cell network for our everyday internet usage. It was expensive, but it worked, and most of us were pretty happy to pay for that luxury. Since the Starlink RV program rolled out, just about every sailboat in the anchorage has a dishy on the back. That's the cute name for their low-budget dish. And it works. There's a good reason everybody has it. It works so well that you basically have the same internet that you do at home, anywhere that you happen to be. Utterly brilliant. But it all may have just changed. The RV program is gone. It's replaced with Roam. So what does that mean for us sailors? Before we get into it, some of you know I just launched a brand new YouTube channel. It's called Historsea. It's all about maritime history. The most recent episodes are awesome. There's one on the Edmund Fitzgerald and one on the ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. If you don't mind, check them out and please subscribe to help me grow that new channel. I'll leave a link below. First, let's talk about what Starlink is for those of you who have been living under a rock or perhaps on a beautiful tropical beach somewhere while the rest of us refit our boats and sort of suffer. Basically, SpaceX launches a gazillion satellites to cover the whole planet with high-speed internet. This was a big deal for a lot of us like me who live in the country. My house could only get about 10 megabytes per second service. That's about 2 Netflixes at the same time. And it was a line-of-sight service, so it went down all the time. Starlink rolled up and said, hey, we can give you city internet in the country. That'll be $1,000 to buy the junk that you got to put on your roof and about $150 a month. But at least it'll be way faster. You'll get at least 50 megs of service. That's 10 Netflixes at the same time for those of you guys that are counting. And it usually runs a lot faster than that. And it won't go down just because a little wind blows. I got it and I've been happier, much happier with it. In fact, everyone in the country around me seems to have it too. It's that awesome. Starlink wasn't finished with just giving us country folk some good internet. They also released a mobile version and a boat version. The mobile one was called RV Starlink, and it meant that you could take Dishy with you to the campground, and you could have the same internet that you have at home. Kind of brilliant. The marine version was different, though. It was aimed at the super yachts and the well-to-do boaters, and was several $1,000s for the equipment and as much as $500 a month. It was well out of the reach of most of us cheapy sailors. But as sailors, we're not the lot that gets bogged down by the stuff that we're not allowed to have. We tend to find a way, and we did. We realized that you could take the RV Starlink and paste it on the stern rail, and then boom, internet. In fact, if you were just in Georgetown in the Bahamas for the regatta, you saw a Dishy on every other sailboat. We love it that much. We also found that because sailboats are relatively slow, you could use that Starlink well under sail. We would get fairly good internet in the middle of the Gulf Stream or offshore somewhere. And well, that's not really necessary for most of us. A lot of people really enjoyed it. It meant that you would never be without weather broadcasts or wind information and, of course, Zoom calls from your boss. I do want to jump in here and say this, and this is important. While Starlink Internet gives us access to the latest wind and weather, it is not to be trusted. Not under any circumstances. You still need a backup solution for that. You should still be reliant on the cell network or whatever you have on land, which is good, usually about 10 miles offshore. But you should still get all the information reliably before you leave a safe harbor and know exactly where it is you'll be going for the next safe harbor. It's nice to get updated info along the way, but it should never be relied upon. All that said, Starlink dropped a bomb recently. The RV plan would be no more. They rebranded it to something they call the Roam plan, and for those of you who have ever checked into customs in the US or Canada, the Roam app might make you cringe a little bit. But the Roam plan is basically the same as the RV plan, and people are still using it on boats right now. It's in the terms of service where things got a little bit tricky. It should be noted that there is a right way to do this. You could just buy the marine plan or maritime plan as they call it. This is the global plan that's meant to be used on boats. It gives you full speed all the time. Costs about $250 a month with a special dishy, not the low budget one we put on our boats or houses or RVs. The high performance dishy that is designed specifically to be used while moving. Old dishy isn't designed to do that, not while you're on the go. But sailboats are so slow, and Starlink hasn't locked down the old dishy yet, so the old dishy does work while you're on the move. It's just not supposed to. If you go with the maritime proper boat plan, you pay a lot more upfront, some $2,500 for the high performance dishy, and that plan gives you global coverage with no slowdowns. But if you're a sailor, you'll likely want the Roam plan, the cheaper one. The Roam plan is $150 a month for the regional version and $200 a month for the global version. We'll get into that in a minute. But it's a much lower setup fee. It's about $250 for dishy. But this plan is where we find all the fine print. First and foremost, the terms of service are very strict in saying this is not for offshore use or use on the move. It simply shouldn't work, even though it does right now. The plan also, and this is the bombshell, it says that the first 50 gigabytes of usage, you get full speed. The normal stuff you'd expect from Starlink, which is quite good. But beyond that 50 gigabytes, you won't be priority anymore, and you may get much lower speeds. 50 gigabytes of usage, if you're wondering, is a few days of usage in a typical family home with 4 people using it. If you're like me and you have a YouTube channel or 2 YouTube channels, you're going to use that up in the first couple of days. Deprioritizing after 50 gigabytes means that any other traffic that is local to you, your neighbor has one, or you're in a town and there's a bunch of them, you're going to take second place to all of that traffic, and you'll see noticeable slowdowns if you're sort of a heavier user, which sailors like us probably aren't. So the deprioritizing thing might just be a non-issue for everybody. In the terms of service, the geographical limitations start to come into play. I mentioned there's a regional and global package. The regional for $150 a month, which is what I have on my boat, says in the terms of service that it will work on the continent in which that it was installed, which is kind of vague because technically that means that I shouldn't need the global version on my boat anywhere in North America, the continent. And last time I checked, the Bahamas is technically in North America. So I should be able to technically use my Starlink from Canada, the US, and the Bahamas. But I sincerely doubt that that would work. If you have tried, please let me know. The $200 a month global Roam plan is the one you probably want. But this is where it gets a little bit weird in the fine print. It says specifically not for offshore use. But we don't know what Starlink considers to be offshore, and it's near impossible to tell the difference between a boat in a marina and the house next to the marina. So does offshore mean 1 nautical mile offshore or 5 nautical miles offshore? It stands to reason that as long as your boat is docked or anchored where we tend to dock or anchor our boats, right next to the shore, it shouldn't make any difference as you're not offshore, but the dish won't be able to tell or differentiate between a marina or a house or an anchorage, most likely. The big takeaway from all this is that obviously Starlink wants you to buy the very expensive and very high performance maritime version of their service if your intention is to use it on a boat. But as sailors who plan to sail around from tropical island to tropical island, it seems like we're slipping through the cracks here in kind of a good way. From Starlink's perspective, we've been seen as RVs, and that seems to be the way it's going to keep going, except for Starlink's ability to limit the low-budget dishy from working well on the move. They haven't really done it, but they could set a trigger, and that remains to be seen. I've heard that the limit might be 10 miles per hour before it gets triggered as on the move and stops working. And I say to that, good. 10 miles per hour is 8.7 knots, and I can surely keep my boat from exceeding 8 knots if I need to. But I don't use the Starlink while I'm sailing or on the move technically. I leave port with all the information that I need, weather, wind, adequate maps downloaded in Navionics, all the active captain stuff for the data I need when I arrive. I'll just leave dishy switched off until I get there. Before I get to my final thought here, please take a moment to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It's free for you and it would really mean the world to me. Something else on the horizon right now, too, that people are starting to talk about. Starlink is partnering with T-Mobile, and it does have some implications for the sailing world. Not anything huge, but it may cause us to scrap that Iridium Go we've been keeping around. While they are trying to get together with T-Mobile, the plan is to make your cell phone work just about anywhere, and that sounds pretty cool. The technology in question doesn't have the bandwidth for crazy fast internet everywhere you happen to bring your boat. In fact, there is no plan for data at all right now. What they are trying to do is to get your phone calls and your text messages to work from anywhere by sort of combining the technologies, which is great. Emergency calling from anywhere would be awesome. The VHF is still king, but it has its limitations, and if my cell phone could work 60 miles offshore in an emergency where the VHF doesn't work, that would be one more layer of protection in an emergency. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make these videos possible. I couldn't do it without you guys. Big shout out to all the existing patrons who have gotten us this far. We're almost at 50,000 subscribers, guys. It's nuts. If you want to help the channel and help me keep making videos, please consider becoming a patron. And if you want to continue the discussion, please check out the Lady K Discord server. It's a bunch of us sailors just sitting around talking about boats. That's it for this week. Until next week, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. We'll see you.